In 1978, a beloved actress vanished at the height of her fame, without a trace, sparking rumors of scandal, overdose, or escape, until 22 years later, after a storm triggers a landslide on a hill, revealing her rusted red Ferrari buried beneath the hillside, reigniting an investigation that would finally reveal what really happened almost 2 decades ago. The hillside gave way just after dawn. Weeks of winter rain had soaked the loose soil above Mulholland Drive until it couldn't hold. When the southern edge collapsed, it pulled down 50 feet of road, power poles, and whatever trees were left clinging to the slope. Mud and debris surged downhill, covering the switchback below in wet, shifting clay. By mid-morning, the road was closed, traffic rerouted, and the repair crew had begun stabilizing the base. A backhoe operator named Daryl Jensen was the first to notice the metal. He'd scraped into it slowly at first, thinking it was another drainage pipe. But when the bucket revealed a contoured curve of red, dented steel and a fragment of side mirror, he stopped and called it in. No one was expecting a car, especially not one facing nose down into the hillside like it had been dropped there from the sky. Within hours, the LAPD had taped off the site. The car was vintage, mid-70s, low to the ground and elegant even under layers of rust and mud. The hood had been crushed inward by decades of shifting soil. Its windshield was opaque with grime. The slope around it steamed faintly in the morning sun as workers cleared dirt with hand tools. That's when they saw the arm. Not attached to the car, just a pale bone wrapped in faded red satin, jutting from the earth a few feet below the front bumper. The dig stopped instantly. Someone radioed the coroner's office. Detective Zoe Hudson pulled up in an unmarked Crown Victoria just after 10 a.m. Uniform slacks still creased, coffee untouched in the cup holder. She was 30, sharp-eyed, and recently promoted to LAPD's Major Crimes Division, though you wouldn't know it from the looks the older officers gave her as she stepped out onto the muddy shoulder. "Hudson," a field supervisor called. "They said we were getting someone from downtown." "You got her," Zoe said, adjusting her jacket collar. He motioned toward the slope. "One body, no ID. Car's too damaged to run plates yet. Coroner's en route." Zoe squinted down at the scene. The Ferrari was almost picturesque in its ruin. Tilted, half-buried, its red exterior streaked with oxidation and earth. The satin cloth downslope clung to what remained of a rib cage. She flipped her notepad open. "How long's it been exposed?" "Couple hours, Max. Road gave out at 6. Crew found the car by 8. "Any sign this was intentional?" "No skid marks, no trail leading in. It's like it was buried deliberately. Might have been here for decades." Zoe turned toward the coroner's van pulling up behind them. "Let's find out who." By noon, the remains had been carefully exhumed. What they found was partial, most of the upper torso, both arms, fragments of the jaw. The red satin wrap had once been a robe, high quality, now threadbare. A broken necklace clasp still clung to a discolored vertebra. The rest of the body was likely destroyed by time, water, or wildlife. No purse, no ID, no wallet, just bones, fabric, and a hillside that had kept the secret for over 20 years. A field tech collected a lock of matted dark hair from the robe's inner fold. "Doesn't match the skull. Might be from someone else." The forensic lead nodded. "Could be the killer." Zoe remained silent, taking in the scene. Something about it didn't feel random. The positioning, the robe, the car, it felt like a burial, not a crash. The Ferrari was older, European, with a distinctive silhouette that still whispered luxury despite its ruined state. "Dino 246 GTS, one of the crime scene photographers said, crouching beside it. "You don't see many of these, especially not in this color." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "It's recognizable?" He nodded. "This red, Rosso Chiaro, it was a signature color back then, limited production. Custom trim on the seats too." Zoe noted it down. A faded dealership sticker on the inside of the door frame had disintegrated, but they managed to retrieve a partial VIN etched under the dashboard. It would take days to cross-reference. No license plates remained. Still, something about the car tugged at Zoe's memory. Late that evening, the coroner's office called. "Dental records came back," the tech said. "We got a match." Zoe paused, bracing herself. "It's her, Lana Fair." Zoe slowly closed the file in front of her. She stood, exhaled once, and reached for a fresh notebook. "Then it's not a cold case anymore," she said. "It's a homicide." By the time Zoe arrived at the precinct the following morning, the case had already gone public. The image on the front page of the Los Angeles Herald was bold. A grainy photo of Lana Fair leaning against a red convertible, lips parted mid-laugh, eyes lifted toward something just off frame. The headline read, "Lana Fair Found. Mulholland Mystery Ignites Decades-Old Legend." It hadn't taken long. Someone, maybe a forensics intern or a cleanup crew member, had tipped off the press. Now every news outlet in LA was tripping over itself to resurrect a story that had never really died. By noon, camera crews were circling the Landslide site. Radio stations replayed old audio clips of Lana's films. Talk shows speculated wildly about murder, suicide, and conspiracy. Captain Brower stood stiffly in the hallway outside Zoe's office, holding a printed memo. "We're enforcing a media freeze," he said flatly, "effective immediately. From here on, this is a sealed homicide investigation." Zoe nodded. Understood. Privately, she welcomed it. If Lana's death had been orchestrated, she didn't want the culprit tipped off. That afternoon, Zoe headed to the basement archives of the Los Angeles Times. She'd called ahead and arranged a meeting with Gideon Arnett, a retired entertainment columnist who had covered Lana throughout the 70s. Gideon was pale and thin now, face lined and eyes dulled by time, but when Zoe mentioned Lana's name, something flickered behind his glasses. "She was lightning in a bottle," he said. "Not just beautiful, clever. She knew how to play the game, until the game turned on her." He poured them each a cup of instant coffee and unrolled a thick manila folder. "I covered her last 4 years, the roles, the rumors, the year she vanished off the face of the earth. Then she popped back up for one last interview and poof." Zoe flipped through the yellowed clippings, premieres, scandals, grainy paparazzi stills, gossip columns about her on-again, off-again director boyfriend. One name came up repeatedly: Vincent Varney. "She disappeared in July of '78, Zoe said. Anything unusual in the months before that?" Gideon pulled out a VHS tape in a plastic case. "You need to watch this." The interview was taped in May 1978, 2 months before Lana vanished. Zoe watched it that evening alone, seated on her apartment floor beside a borrowed TV-VCR combo. Lana appeared poised, composed, glowing in soft studio light. Her voice was velvet smooth. She joked easily with the host, recounted childhood stories, teased a Broadway return. Nothing in her tone suggested instability or fear. There was no mention of stress, no erratic behavior. Lana came off like a woman who had plans, a woman who expected to see them through. Zoe watched the interview twice, pausing every few minutes to study Lana's expressions. There was something in her eyes, measured, perhaps even guarded, but not broken. She wasn't unraveling, Zoe said aloud. She was preparing for something. At the precinct, the coroner's lab sent Zoe a quiet update. The hair sample collected from the robe near the remains was confirmed, not a match for Lana. It had likely come from a man, medium length, dark, unprocessed. But the DNA did not yield a match in any national database. No felon profile, no military or medical records. Zoe stared at the report. If it wasn't Lana's and it wasn't cataloged, then it might belong to the person responsible for her death, or someone who'd tried to help her. Either way, the timeline narrowed. Lana had been buried deliberately. Whoever was with her at the end had taken the time to wrap her in a robe, lay her beneath the slope, and erase the trail. Zoe filed the sample for retesting. Maybe a match would come later. She spent the next few days diving deeper, reading interview transcripts, watching archived talk shows, and scanning old press kits. In 1976, Lana had abruptly ended her contract with one of the major studios. She took a year off, moving to Palm Springs and staying largely out of public view. Tabloids at the time speculated she'd had a breakdown. A few whispered rumors of pregnancy. One even hinted at a secret rehab stint. But when she reemerged in 1978, she looked strong, clear-eyed, ready. That was the version of Lana Zoe couldn't stop watching. A woman who had something to say and maybe hadn't gotten the chance. Late one night, Zoe sat on her living room floor watching Lana's 1974 drama, The Clay Rose. It wasn't the kind of movie she usually enjoyed, period romance, heavy monologues, but Lana had a way of commanding the screen. Every expression carried weight. Every silence felt deliberate. Zoe caught herself leaning forward when Lana delivered the film's final line. The truth doesn't go away just because you close your eyes. She didn't know why, but it stuck with her. By the end of the week, a partial tip came in through an anonymous caller. A man had been seen frequently near Mulholland Drive in the late 1970s, lingering at pull-off spots, watching the road with binoculars. He drove an old truck, wore the same brown jacket every day. Zoe parked across the street from a low-rise duplex in Woodland Hills. The lawn was unkempt, and a white tarp flapped over part of the roof. She stepped out of her Crown Vic, double-checked the address, and approached the door. Eddie Langford was now 68, thin with jaundiced skin and a limp from a car accident in '91. In 1979, he'd served time for operating a stolen vehicle ring near Laurel Canyon, a chop shop operation that briefly made headlines. Zoe leaned against the railing while he wheezed through a cigarette. He didn't deny his past. Ferrari Dino? Nah, he said, shrugging. Those were too hot. You drive one of those around here, people notice. I like things you could strip quiet. Chevys, Datsuns. Zoe showed him a photo of Lana from 1978. He squinted. That's that actress, huh? Nah, I never met her, not in person. He agreed to give a fresh statement. Back at the lab, Zoe pushed for a forensic sweep of his past shop's records and ran latent fingerprints from the Ferrari's interior against his archive prints. Nothing matched. Later that week, a faded invoice surfaced showing Eddie had been incarcerated from April to August of 1978. Lana vanished in July. The lead collapsed. 2 weeks passed. No further evidence surfaced. At the Monday morning briefing, Captain Brower addressed the room with practiced indifference. Forensics came back with no sign of blunt force trauma, no definitive time of death. It could have been an accident, a crash. Maybe she drove off the road and never made it out. Case stays open, but we're pulling resources. Hudson, you'll monitor any late leads? A few heads nodded, relieved to close the file in everything but name. Zoe didn't respond. She returned to her desk and stared at the image still on her screen, the red Dino, nose first in the earth like it had been swallowed whole. She knew better. The burial was deliberate. Someone had wanted her to vanish and almost succeeded. They were ready to call it a tragic accident. But Zoe wasn't. The gates of Velmont Studios opened slowly, just enough to let Zoe's cruiser roll onto the lot. Though the studio had changed ownership 3 times since 1978, its reputation lingered like smog. In the 70s, Velmont had been the home of mid-budget thrillers, romance pictures, and vanity vehicles for hot young stars. Lana had filmed 3 of her movies there. Zoe had compiled a short list of surviving employees. Most were in their 70s or 80s now. A few responded with polite deflection. Some hung up before she could introduce herself. Inside a dusty corner office that now served as prop storage, she found Dolores Dolly Finch, who'd worked as a hairdresser during Lana's final 2 years on contract. Dolly greeted her with cautious warmth, brushing imaginary lint from her sleeves. She was sweet, but different near the end, Dolly said, stirring powdered creamer into her tea. Paranoid sometimes. always checking her purse, wouldn't leave things in her dressing room. Zoe leaned in. Did she ever say why? She was scared of someone, I think, but in this town, that's like saying it's sunny. The conversation stalled. Most former employees Zoe contacted gave her similar variations of the same refrain. I don't remember. She never mentioned anything to me. Lana kept to herself. I didn't know her well, but Zoe knew when people were lying, and many of them weren't just forgetful, they were afraid. Something about Lana's name still carried weight, or maybe it was the name of whoever had last been seen with her. Back at her apartment, Zoe rewatched the May 1978 interview, not the broadcast version, the outtakes. She noticed something small this time, a pause in Lana's answer when asked about her relationship with her last director. Lana's smile faltered just for a second. Then she said, "We had creative differences." Zoe paused the tape. That wasn't a phrase Lana would have used in jest. It was late afternoon when Zoe tracked down Carla Price, a former production assistant on Moon River, Lana's final film before her hiatus. They met in the food court of an empty Glendale mall. Carla looked about 55, dressed in plain clothes, sunglasses still tucked into her neckline even indoors. "I thought she'd just run," Carla said. "Everyone did." "But you had doubts," Zoe pressed. Carla hesitated, her voice lowered. "I think she was planning something, not a disappearance, something bigger." "What do you mean?" "She asked about lawyers, about where to go to, drop something on someone. Said she was tired of being used, tired of being watched." "Did she say who?" "No," Carla said. Zoe jotted the notes down. "Do you remember anything else?" "She said if anything happened to her, the people at the top would bury it, and they'd bury her too." That line stayed with Zoe long after she left. Back at her desk that evening, Zoe sorted through her notes, photographs, and printouts. The evidence board looked like a half-finished puzzle, Lana in the center, surrounded by disconnected rumors and contradictory stories. Then her desk phone rang. The voice on the other end was gravelly, masculine, and quiet. "I heard you're looking into Lana," he said. "I was on crew back then, studio grip. I know things." Zoe straightened. "Who am I speaking with?" The man ignored the question. "Not important." "What do you know?" "I'll meet you, somewhere public. Not on tape. I'm not stupid." Zoe scribbled quickly. "Where?" "Top of Vista Theater parking garage. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Don't bring anyone." The line went dead. Zoe sat back. Her pulse had quickened, but she didn't move. For the first time in days, the case felt like it had cracked open. Someone out there still remembered, and they were finally ready to talk. Is Zoe walking straight into a trap? Or is she about to get vital intel? What do you think? Comment below. Who really killed Lana and why? Give this video a like and keep watching to find out. The Vista Theater parking garage meeting never happened. Zoe arrived 5 minutes early, waited 20. No one came. It wasn't until the following morning that she received another call. This time, the voice on the other end sounded hoarse, winded. "Too many eyes last night," he said. "Meet me at Sunland Diner, Northwest Corner booth, 10 a.m. Don't be late." By 9:45, Zoe was seated in the empty booth, nursing a bitter cup of coffee. She recognized the man the moment he walked in. Gray beard, weathered hands, faded work jacket with the name patch long peeled away. He sat without greeting her, only nodded once like they were resuming an old conversation. "I was a dolly grip," he said. "Velmont Studios. I did 2 pictures with Lana, the last one's when it went bad." Zoe waited. "There was a shoot," he went on, "not for the movie, something off the books. They called it a costume test, but it wasn't for wardrobe, it was for leverage." "Leverage?" Zoe asked. He met her eyes. "Blackmail. The actresses didn't know they were being photographed that way. Lana found out. Somehow she got hold of contact sheets, photos from multiple sessions, girls who were promised leads, fame, their own trailers, and in exchange, He let the sentence drift into the greasy air. She told me she was going to expose it. She even joked, said, "Let's see if they put that in Variety." Zoe's pen stilled against her notebook. And then, 4 days later, she vanished. He scribbled something on a napkin, an address in Burbank. "Storage vault under Soundstage B," he said. "Used to be a print archive. Negatives, raw takes, all the junk the execs didn't want to toss. Lana told me that's where the real stuff was kept." Zoe thanked him. Before she could ask more, he stood and left, leaving his coffee untouched. That afternoon, Zoe pulled up to the address, an old warehouse-style studio building with boarded-up windows and a chain-link gate that creaked in the wind. The lot was being repurposed into a sound design hub, according to the signs. No security, no posted staff. She slipped past the side entrance and descended into the basement via a rusted staircase. The room below had clearly been cleared out in a hurry. Dust trails where cabinets once stood. Paper fragments littered the floor, half-torn file tabs, brittle 35mm leader tape, a cigarette butt still fresh in a corner. Someone had been here recently. Zoe paced the space, feeling the hollowness thicken around her. Back at the station, she asked to review city records, building maintenance logs, tenant lease transfers, police patrol routes near the area. No recent footage, no authorized access. Either someone had wiped the record clean or someone with access had tipped the place off. Zoe got home after 9 p.m. The house was dark, unusually quiet. She flicked the light switch by instinct. Nothing. "Gran?" she called out. Silence. She moved through the hallway cautiously. The door to her grandmother's room was ajar. The frame splintered near the lock. Then she saw the overturned lamp, the glass shards scattered across the rug, and the pale arms sticking out from behind the dresser. "Gran!" Zoe rushed forward. Her grandmother lay on the floor, one leg twisted beneath her, blood matting the side of her temple. Her chest rose faintly, still alive. Zoe grabbed the phone, called 911, then pressed a kitchen towel to the wound, whispering, "Stay with me, please, stay with me," again and again. The EMTs arrived within minutes. They loaded her grandmother onto a stretcher. Zoe rode with them, clutching her hand the entire way, but the old woman never opened her eyes. At St. Margaret's ER, the staff wheeled her into a trauma bay. A nurse pulled Zoe aside. "She's critical. We'll do what we can." Zoe didn't reply. Her hands were still streaked with her grandmother's blood. 2 hours later, Zoe was allowed to sit at her grandmother's bedside. The machines beeped steadily, but her pulse was weak, her breathing ragged. A thin stream of blood had dried at her temple. Zoe reached out and touched her hand. It twitched faintly in response. Her eyes fluttered open. "Zoe?" Her voice was papery, barely audible. "I'm here." Her fingers curled slightly, tugging at Zoe's hand. "The box? In the floor?" Zoe leaned in closer. "What box?" "In the closet, under the wood. Find it." Zoe's throat tightened. "Gran, just rest. We'll talk soon." But her grandmother's gaze had already dulled. Her chest rose once more, and then stopped. Zoe sat there in stillness, the beeping flattening into a tone that filled the room like a curtain drawing closed. Zoe returned home sometime after 2 a.m. The house still smelled like blood and broken things. A draft moved through the cracked window in the hallway. She stepped into her grandmother's bedroom, kneeling by the closet. She moved aside the shoes and storage boxes, her fingers brushing against the floorboards until one gave under pressure with a soft crack. She pried it open. Inside was a weathered shoebox, sealed with yellowing tape. On the lid, written in neat, slanted cursive, "For her when she's ready." Zoe sat on the floor. For a long time, she just stared at the words. She peeled the tape, heart pounding now, hands trembling, not from fear, but from something deeper. Anticipation laced with dread. Inside the box, beneath the letter and necklace, lay a small photograph, curled at the corners, its colors faded like a memory too long suppressed. Zoe lifted it slowly. It was a candid shot, taken indoors. A young woman sat on a sofa in a modest room, sunlight catching the ends of her auburn hair. Her expression was tired, but unmistakably proud. In her arms, swaddled in a pink blanket, was a newborn baby. The woman's face was familiar. So familiar it made Zoe's chest tighten. Lana Fair. The resemblance was too strong to ignore now. Zoe had always noticed something unusual about her own eyes in the mirror. The deep-set melancholy, the shadow of something unreachable. Now she saw those same eyes gazing back at her from a grainy, 30-year-old photograph. The baby, she realized, was her. Hands trembling, Zoe unfolded the letter. It was written on aged cream stationery, the handwriting neat but slightly hurried, like someone writing in a moment stolen from danger. The ink had faded, but was still legible. To my little girl, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to tell you myself. I want you to know first, before anything else, that you were never a mistake. You are the only thing I ever did that made me feel clean, real. I kept you safe by letting you go. I had to. The man I once trusted, the one who said he made me, he started watching everything I did. I wasn't the first girl he tried to own, and I wouldn't be the last. I had evidence, photographs, names. Enough to ruin men who thought they'd never answer to anyone. I thought I could expose them, disappear, and raise you in peace. But I was wrong, and I think they're coming for me now. If this is all you get of me, know this. I wanted you. I loved you. You are not their shame. You are mine, and that is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Your necklace was the first thing I ever bought when I knew you were coming. Mine is the twin of it. If they're together again, it means the truth has found you. Don't let them bury me forever. Lana. Zoe finished reading it with her head bowed. Her fingers clutched the edges of the paper, creasing it where her grip tightened. All those years being teased in school. The sideways looks, the cruel jokes. Orphan girl. No one wanted her. None of it mattered now. She felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, the fullness of emotion pushing up her throat, but she didn't cry. She sat still, hollowed out by the revelation, unable to reconcile the quiet, ordinary life she'd lived with the truth she now held. Her grandmother must have known all along and had protected that secret with every fiber of her being. The necklace, the one she'd found in the box, was delicate, gold, with a small 5-pointed star. Zoe unclasped it from its cloth wrapping and held it against a picture of the necklace she had recovered from the scene with Lana's remains. They were identical. It was real. All of it. When the grief settled just enough to breathe again, something else filled the space. Fire. Zoe stood, legs stiff, jaw set. She tucked the letter, the photograph, and the necklace back into the box and placed it carefully in her bag. She no longer needed to ask who the one who said he made me was. She already knew. Vincent Varney. She had read the early gossip columns, the suggestive, half-denied romance between the young Lana Fair and the up-and-coming auteur director. No one called it what it really was. Not then. Coercion, grooming. It wasn't language the public knew how to use, not in 1978. By morning, she had filed an affidavit and a formal request for a warrant. The office building was tucked off a side street near Laurel Canyon, sandwiched between an art gallery and a yoga studio. It looked innocuous enough from the outside. Frosted glass windows, sleek black awning, brushed aluminum signage reading Varney Pictures in minimalist font. Inside, it smelled like dust and air freshener. A few posters of past films hung on the walls. Varney's hits, from the moody noir flicks of the 80s to the stylized courtroom dramas of the early 90s. A forensic team was already inside, gloved and methodical. Zoe watched them sweep through the rooms with deliberate care. She kept her voice low as she directed them to the rear hall. "There's a chance this space has been modified," she said. "Check for structural inconsistencies, false panels, hollow partitions." One of the techs tapped a section of the back wall in the editing bay. The sound was different, duller. He turned to Zoe. "Found something." It took 15 minutes to carefully pry the wall open. Behind it, a narrow crawl space, dark and stale with mildew. Inside were 2 plastic storage bins, the kind used for film reels. Each one was sealed, labeled only with Roman numerals. The investigators lifted the lids slowly. Inside were dozens of undeveloped negatives, sealed in archival sleeves. Some were labeled with actress names, others with dates. None were authorized. Below the negatives lay ledgers, hardbound notebooks with lists of names, cash figures, and check numbers. Some were scribbled with initials, others with job titles. Zoe flipped through one page. $15,000, wardrobe, $2,500, makeup, $30,000, grip silence, Lana FX. Her hands froze. It was the paper trail, everything Lana had tried to gather. The records of the silence bought with checks and promises. The dark room buzzed with low hums and red light. It was tucked in the basement of the LAPD's Forensic Media Division, a place that felt decades behind the rest of the department, but was suddenly the most important room in the building. Zoe stood behind a pane of glass, arms crossed, watching as the technician carefully laid the negatives across the light table. One by one, images of women flickered into focus. Some were grainy, others disturbingly clear. The angle of the lens was low, secretive. Faces weren't always shown, but when they were, the expressions made Zoe's stomach knot. Fear, embarrassment, discomfort masked with forced smiles. "This one," the tech said, pointing. Zoe leaned in. It was Lana. She was seated on a velvet stool, draped in a silk robe that had fallen from one shoulder. A man's hand was visible in the edge of the frame, adjusting the light, or pretending to. Lana wasn't smiling. Her lips were parted slightly, as if mid-protest, her eyes heavy with unease. Another photo showed her standing in front of a painted backdrop, arms crossed tightly over her chest. The robe was open now, loosely knotted at the waist. Her eyes were fixed on someone outside the frame, narrowed. "Wardrobe test," the logbook had said. But there was no wardrobe department listed, no camera assistant, no lighting crew. Just a date, April the 3rd, 1978, a month before she vanished. More negatives followed, other actresses Zoe didn't recognize right away. Different eras, different names. They were all cataloged, bagged, and entered into evidence. A separate envelope labeled 1978 promo outtakes was found among the negatives, its contents recorded on a partially degraded 16mm reel. In the media room, Zoe sat in the dark with 2 forensic specialists as the reel was threaded through the projector. Static danced across the screen before it settled into a shaky shot of Lana seated in a velvet chair, her hair pinned up, eyes sharp. Lana paused, glanced toward someone off camera. Then her voice dropped. "They think they own us, you know? I was 19 when it started. These men, they've been pimping out girls like me since I was 19. She laughed once, bitterly. "And now that I've got proof." The footage cut to static. The room stayed silent as the tape flapped off the reel. Zoe exhaled slowly. She was about to name them. "Looks like someone made sure she didn't," one of the techs muttered. Zoe didn't reply. Her mind was already racing ahead. With the evidence now in hand, the photos, the ledgers, the checks, the partial footage, Zoe prepared her case briefing. Her presentation to the DA's office was met with shock, then grim agreement. What they had was enough for charges of conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, coercion, and potentially murder. Zoe stood before a dry erase board, laying out the timeline from Lana's final interview to her disappearance. Across it all, Varney's name sat like a rotted thread, weaving the events together. "It's time," she said. "Let's bring him in." The tactical team moved in just before sunrise. Varney's estate was nestled in the Hollywood Hills behind wrought iron gates and high hedges. It was quiet, too quiet. Zoe approached the door with a tight grip on her badge. They used a key recovered from the office raid to enter. Inside, the place was sterile, lifeless. Drawers in the study were open, contents emptied. The closet shelves were bare. The safe had been left ajar, empty. In the kitchen, a burner phone sat on the counter, its back cover pried off. Zoe picked it up with a gloved hand and handed it to Tech. Check for recent calls or texts. Already wiped, the officer replied. One of the team returned from upstairs. Bed stripped, luggage is gone, passport drawers empty. Zoe turned to the lead officer, put out the alert. By nightfall, a national warrant had been issued for the arrest of Vincent Varney. Zoe stood before a bank of monitors at the precinct's command center, watching as digital maps lit up with alerts to regional field offices. The FBI was looped in. Airports, train stations, and border crossings were notified. She didn't say a word for several minutes. She was thinking of Lana, sitting in that chair, whispering the start of a confession into a camera she likely didn't realize would be buried for decades. She was thinking of the women in the photos. How many had never spoken? How many had tried and were silenced? And she was thinking of her mother. Not the woman in the gossip columns, not the sex symbol, but the young mother in the faded photo, holding her infant with tired but fierce eyes. "We'll find him," Zoe said quietly. One of the agents beside her nodded. "He can't run forever." Zoe's gaze didn't leave the screen. "He won't." It was late April when the call came. Zoe had just stepped outside for air, the downtown breeze thick with exhaust and something close to spring. Her cell rang with an unfamiliar number from Northern California. "Detective Hudson?" the voice asked. "Yes. This is Sheriff Clay Boyd from Monterey County. You're going to want to hear this." The drive up the coast was quiet, the kind of silence Zoe welcomed. The sun hung low over the cliffs as she and two U.S. Marshals rolled past winding pines and narrow turns. Sheriff Boyd had held off for as long as he could. The rental was a short-term beach property, cash only, no ID required. The property manager had noticed someone odd, older, traveling alone. The man kept the blinds shut all day and walked to town only after dark. He asked for blackout curtains, Boyd had said he was a writer. When they pulled up to the rental, the sky was dimming. The driveway was empty, but lights flickered behind the drawn curtains. The marshals moved silently to both entrances, and Zoe followed closely behind. Inside, they heard the sound of drawers being opened, a suitcase being zipped. The door gave under the ram in 2 hits. "LAPD, hands where we can see them." Vincent Varney stood in the middle of the living room, a shirt half-buttoned, suitcase open beside him. His face was sunken, paler than Zoe remembered from old photos, but his eyes were sharp. "Hands behind your head," Zoe replied. He complied, quietly, no resistance, no denial. As the cuffs clicked into place, Varney looked up at Zoe and gave her a long, measured glance. Varney was booked in a secure Monterey facility, then transported to Los Angeles under heavy watch. During processing, a DNA sample was taken, buccal swab, signed and logged. Zoe didn't speak to him, not yet. She needed the evidence to speak first. 2 days later, the results arrived. The lab tech handed her the file without ceremony, but his face said enough. "Hair from Lana's body," Zoe said. "Matched," he confirmed. "Vincent Varney, he was there." Zoe nodded once. She turned the page to the DNA analysis summary. The evidence didn't just place Varney at the scene of Lana's final moments. It linked him irrevocably to the crime. There was no plausible deniability, no second suspect, no studio cover left to hide behind. She closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Zoe sat in the passenger seat of the forensic van as it idled in the parking lot behind LAPD headquarters. The envelope rested on her lap, light almost absurdly so. Inside were the materials for a second DNA test, this one ordered quietly, without any entry in the department's formal case log. Only she and one trusted lab technician knew. The test was personal. She had sealed her own swab alongside Varney's. The form had a fake name and a case number that corresponded to a closed file from 2 years ago. A placeholder, nothing more. The technician would compare the samples and deliver the results directly to her. It was late afternoon when the call came. She answered before the second ring. "It's a match," the technician said simply. "Paternal, 99.9%. Zoe didn't speak, not even a breath. "I can print it out if, No," she said. "Destroy the samples, thank you." She ended the call, stared out at the horizon, and let the truth settle like sediment in water. Vincent Varney wasn't just the man who orchestrated Lana Fair's death. He was her father. The cold concrete walls of room 3B never changed, no matter who sat on the other side of the glass. Today, the chair was occupied by a man who had once wielded power like oxygen, needed by all, answerable to none. Now, he looked small in it. The shackles around his wrists didn't clink, they just held him still. Zoe walked in with a folder under her arm. She didn't bother with a preamble. She sat, opened the folder, and began laying things on the table one by one. First, the ledger page, check numbers, dates, names of payoffs scribbled in long dead handwriting. Then, the photographs. Lana's eyes stood out from the rest, clear, wary, unmistakably present. Next came the still image from the unearthed footage, Lana's lips parting as she began to speak the words that never fully aired. Zoe placed the final sheet on the table, the lab printout confirming the DNA match between Varney and the hair found on Lana's skeletal remains. She leaned back in the chair and folded her arms. "We have a lot of ground to cover," she said. Varney smirked faintly, but his eyes flickered. "So this is how it ends?" he asked, voice gravel-thick with age and defiance. Zoe didn't respond. She waited. "I've already seen the reports. Your team has what you think is a story, but you don't understand what those years were like. Everyone knew what they were signing up for. It was part of the game." "No," Zoe said flatly. "It was a crime." He shrugged. "Lana, she knew how to play it better than anyone." Zoe pulled the still image closer between them. "You were in a relationship with her." Varney stiffened. "You groomed her. You cast her. You controlled her. And when she told you she was pregnant, you cut her off." "That's not how it happened." Zoe let the silence stretch. He was unraveling, slowly, but she could feel it. He continued, the smirk fading. "Yes, we were together, secretly. It wasn't supposed to last. She got too clingy, started questioning everything. And then, one day she shows up with this photograph. A baby. Said it was mine." "Was it?" His eyes twitched. "She said it didn't matter. She just wanted out. She wanted to be done with everything, but she wouldn't go quietly, not without trying to drag me down too. She said she had evidence, letters, photos. I told her we could talk, privately." "Mulholland?" Varney's mouth was dry now. He nodded once. "She came to the house. She had a box of things she wanted me to see, said if anything happened to her, someone else would know where to look. She wanted me to confess, to give her a way out." Zoe watched him intently, but her voice was steady. "And?" "She came to the house. She wanted to meet face to face. I thought I could make her listen, but she wasn't there to negotiate. She was there to threaten, to destroy everything I built." Zoe didn't speak. "I snapped," he said finally. "She wouldn't stop. She said she was going public the next day. I told her to sit down, to calm down, but she just kept shouting." "So you silenced her?" "I didn't mean to," he said quickly. "I grabbed her." She hit her head. "It wasn't supposed to go that far." "But you buried her anyway." He looked away. "You made sure the car vanished. You called in a favor to clear the vault. You paid off the staff. And you kept the photos like trophies." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't think they'd ever find her." Zoe pushed her chair back, slowly stood. Her hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides. She turned toward the door, then paused to face him one last time. "I hope you rot for what you did, Dad." The word landed like a slap. Varney's face crumpled for a moment, just a flicker, before he looked away. It started quietly. Just a column inch on page 2 of the Los Angeles Times, a photo of the rusted Ferrari in Mulholland mud. By the time Vincent Varney was marched into court in chains, Lana Fair's name was everywhere. News tickers, talk shows, op-eds titled, "The Star Who Never Got Justice Until Now." This time, the headlines weren't lurid. This time, she was not the fading starlet with secrets. She was the victim. Zoe watched it all in silence, avoiding the spotlight. She kept her focus on the facts, the negatives, the ledger, the final letter, the confession. But the public attention changed everything. More calls came into the LAPD's tip line, anonymous letters. Women, some who had long buried what happened, began to step forward. Some were names Zoe recognized from old film credits. Others were interns, makeup artists, bit players. They didn't all want to be public, but they wanted Varney held accountable. It was the biggest case in LA Superior Court that year. The prosecution's witness list stretched 10 pages. The courtroom was tightly controlled but packed. Varney's legal team, expensive and seasoned, tried to steer the story into old territory. Lana's supposed instability, her vanishing act, her unverified claims. But the evidence spoke louder. Zoe took the stand late in the second week of the trial. Her badge was polished. Her voice was calm. When asked to walk the court through the discovery, the landslide, the body, the identification, the chain of evidence, she did so like a professional. Then came the question from the defense. "Detective Hudson, isn't it true that recent DNA testing confirms the defendant is your biological father?" A hush fell across the courtroom. Zoe's jaw clenched just briefly. Then she met the attorney's gaze. "Yes, unfortunately." A few jurors stirred. "And how does that affect your objectivity in this case?" the attorney asked. Zoe didn't flinch. "It doesn't. I wasn't raised by him. I didn't know who he was until the investigation. But let me be clear. I am disgusted to share the same blood as him. He is a monster, a coward, and he murdered my mother." There was silence for a full 5 seconds before the prosecutor rose and said, "No further questions." In total, 5 women testified. Each told a different story, but the pattern was the same. Promises made, careers dangled, then coercion, silence, shame. The defense tried to attack their credibility, tried to suggest money, media attention, false memory. But it didn't work. There were too many of them. Their stories echoed across the decades. And Zoe was their anchor. The jury returned in just under 7 hours. 12 faces, no emotion. The forewoman stood and read the verdict. Guilty of all charges. She looked at Varney. He didn't react, just sat with his head slightly tilted as if waiting for someone to call cut. But this wasn't a scene, this was real. The judge's voice echoed. "Vincent Allen Varney, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck. Justice had been served. The cemetery sat on a quiet hill in Westwood beneath a line of eucalyptus trees swaying faintly in the spring breeze. The city hummed beyond the gates, but here it was still. Lana Fair had finally come home. Zoe stood beside the modest headstone, dressed not in uniform, but in a simple navy blouse and charcoal skirt. She hadn't invited cameras or dignitaries, just a small crowd of those who mattered. 2 of the women who testified, the studio grip who risked everything, and the forensic tech who'd spent late nights verifying bone structure and dental records. No press, no spectacle, just truth. The headstone was simple. Lana Fair, 1946 to 1978, beloved mother. Zoe stepped forward last. She held something in her hand, a small gold star on a delicate chain. She'd carried it for weeks, turning it over in her palm like a worry stone. Now kneeling, she laid it gently at the base of the headstone. Here were so many things she wanted to say, but the words came slowly. "I used to think I was abandoned," she murmured, "that you didn't want me, that you left." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. But you didn't leave. You fought. A week later, she stood in front of the Los Angeles County Clerk's office. The form was already filled out, signed, notarized. She waited quietly until her number was called. Inside the small booth, she handed over her paperwork to the attendant. "Legal name change?" the woman asked, glancing at the form. Zoe nodded. The attendant smiled faintly, then typed, "Detective Zoe Fair," nice ring to it. Zoe didn't smile back, but her eyes softened. "It's my mom's." One evening, near dusk, Zoe returned to Mulholland. The hillside had been reinforced, the red tape long gone, the slope grassed over with hydroseed and erosion netting. Drivers passed without knowing what had been hidden beneath. She parked and stepped out, walking down toward the spot. The air smelled like damp dirt and eucalyptus. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote barked once. She stood for a long time, arms crossed. Then she whispered aloud, "I hope it didn't hurt. I hope you knew you weren't alone. I love you, Mom. Rest in peace." Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.